The meeting will now come to order. Welcome to this meeting of the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Board. Today is Thursday, January the 7th, 2021. Happy New Year to all. It is like 4:02 p.m. My name is Cindy Burnett, and would each board member present please state your name for the record, and we'll start with Paul, do the ones present, and then we'll do the ones virtual. We have a few people coming in late, but maybe they'll be here.
Paul Roberts.
Jack Farrell.
Joel? Joel, you're up. Just give us your name. Or Joel Schreiber. We're doing roll call.
Know who he is.
And then we'll do those online. I think Sonia, are you there?
Sonia Rothstein, but I have no picture of the meeting.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I do not have a picture of the meeting.
No video.
IT working on that? I think they're working on it, Sonia.
Okay, thank you.
We'll just hold off for a minute until we get things straightened out.
Okay, great, thank you.
You let us know when you can see the meeting.
Okay.
Other than that, Sonia, do you have any trouble hearing us?
No.
Great.
Pardon me? Yeah, it was quiet. We actually went out and stayed up till midnight. Well, there got to talking, and we got,
All right, so we're still kind of working that out a little bit. If we want, since we do have 5 here and no visuals really required, just kind of get going and review and act on the minutes of last month's meeting if you'd like.
Okay.
Hopefully by then we'll get it straightened out.
All right, so we have 5 of us, 3, 4, 5 that are present, so we have a quorum, so we can do business tonight. Alex Cameron is serving as our staff to the board, and we will follow the order of the agenda. So the first item of the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes for the December 3rd meeting. Can you hear us okay, Sonia?
Yes.
Okay. And then, welcome, Philip. Are there any questions or corrections for the December 3rd, 2020 regular meeting minutes? Anyone? Is there a motion to approve the minutes for December 3rd?
I move to approve the minutes of the 12/3/2020 regular meeting.
Do you have a second?
Second.
I got a nod from Joel and a second from Sonia. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. And we move to general business. I don't know, first item on general business is the potential draft language for the tree preservation. Do you want to start with that, or do you want to wait for Darren?
I think we can go ahead and get started. We know the material's been circulated to everyone, whether they're currently with us or not.
Can we just check one thing?
Yes, sir.
Can you ask Philip if he can see us?
Okay. Philip, do you have a visual on us?
I can see and hear you clearly.
Okay, good. We were wondering if it may have been on Sonia's end, why she wasn't able to see us but could hear us. Sonia, is there any status change in that for you?
Yeah, I can see you now. I think
Okay.
it wasn't your end, I don't think it was on my end, but whatever, we got it.
Awesome, good. Now we're cooking with gas. Okay. So yeah, we'll go ahead and jump right in. I was able to send out the email to the group yesterday, tried to give a quick bullet point to what expected changes you should see in this version from last month's version. And a lot of that was based on some of the feedback as we were kind of talking through this as a group. We were able to largely get a consensus from the group from last month's meeting on some other sort of more dimensional criteria or hard numbers that we needed to go forward. So we kept that and incorporated that information. One item, which was a good suggestion from the board, was, we added the 20-foot driveway credit, 20-foot driveway credit from the front. So you'll see that incorporated in there. Another item was, how do we handle the existing developed lots such that we're not being too onerous on if a current property owner who has a development that, came through his own development review and right process, and if they want to have any type of minor changes, additions, alterations that wouldn't trigger full compliance with what we're proposing at this point, what we kind of looked at is kind of the standard in the industry is if anything is proposed maybe greater than 50%, if you're doing an addition or any type of redevelopment where you're going beyond a 50% threshold of the actual development of the parcel itself, then potentially that might be the number we look at now triggering full compliance with what we've got drafted now. That number could still be up for discussion here with the board. That's just what we arrived at with staff. Obviously, if you own a lot and you've got your development right and it's been established, and then you go and completely remove or demolish, and then you're going to completely redevelop the lot, then that would, the way we have it currently here, would obviously trigger full compliance with this. And in the long term, 40, 50 years from now, we felt that would allow for that continuity of the landscaping to kind of keep going. Other than that, there's some diagrams to kind of help visualize some of what we have been crafting for several months now.
Question, is the 50% of the property or 50% of the facility?
It's usually the size or sometimes the cost. So that, again, that's something we definitely want to try to discuss today and get some sort of consensus from you guys. And I just wanted to lead it off. I do want to let Kathy kind of delve into it a little bit more, as she's the one who's done most of the penmanship here for this draft, and Darren and I have been just lucky enough to review and provide feedback as we've gotten it and sit down with Kathy, and she's taken some of her own approaches to it, and it was so helpful to have her actually here at the meetings too, to hear what you guys are saying. And Kathy, if there's anything else you want to add to those big changes from last time?
Yeah, I think we did go back in. I know one of the concerns that had been expressed maybe 2 meetings ago was over the availability of nursery stock. So we did go back in there and provide a little bit more insight in terms of what size caliper trees, and we added a height to that. So you can go smaller on the caliper, but make sure that we get a tree that's going to mature in a good period of time. We eliminated the definition of clear cutting. And what we used is the definition of clearing and grading. It's actually from the state definition for sedimentation and erosion control. We just pulled the sedimentation part out of it because our focus is not so much on sedimentation in this one. And I think it works better, and it kind of moves us away from that. You know, if you're going to require a clearing and grading permit, then define clearing and grading. So I think that's what we did with this one. The way the redevelopment language is listed, it is based on the size of the building. So if somebody wanted to come back in and increase a home size by 50%, then that's what would trigger the classification of redevelopment. But as Alex mentioned, that one's completely, I think, up to your discretion in terms of what you would like to use. With the existing lots of record, the standard that I used was if you basically had a landscape plan from before, you had a tree requirement, you know, that was actually part of that landscape plan. And so I pulled that tree number forward. So instead of running you through the new calculations, we use the standard that's been in place for existing lots of record, where you're not doing a great deal of conversion.
But so you're not exempted from having some sort of landscaping. It's just not going to be necessarily the new requirement, but most likely the requirement that you would have had in place whenever you got your development approval.
Mm-hmm. Looking to see, I think some of the diagrams are pretty self-explanatory. We did drop the tree size in the survey down to 6-inch DBH. I couldn't remember if we did that the last meeting or this meeting, but this allows people, if they don't have a lot of the protected tree sizes on their property, at least they would have identified trees that could be used in lieu of, rather than having to plant. So that's, I think, a cost savings for people, and doesn't just say you can only do protected trees, you can do others. We included the front yard measurements. When we went to the 20-foot subtraction for the driveway, we dropped to that lower linear foot measurement for calculating trees, which I think is what everybody was good on last time. Looking to see what else we really had. I think that's the major part out of 9.5, part 1. When we pop over to 9.14, once again, we locked in the number of trees, and this is where you'll see the tree placement and planting. So with evergreen trees, we put a minimum planting height of 6 feet and a 2-inch caliper. And we defaulted to tall and short trees that are already in our appendices. And so with tall trees, your minimum planting height is 8 feet, and you can do a 2-inch. But if it's a short tree, a dogwood or something like that, or a multi-branch tree, your minimum planting height is 6 feet, but you could drop down as low as 1 1/4 inches on some of these smaller trees. And the focus on the front yard is to go more with the taller trees, so that way you're promoting that canopy along the road front, but then recognizing that you could do tall or short trees in the other yards. And I think those are probably the high points.
What if someone wants to do, like, there's a house that I walk by that has a center island in the front yard with crepe myrtles in it and plantings and whatever. So they don't have big trees, but they do have trees that add to the landscape, and it is very attractive. So I don't know, that's not going to be an option, or that's going to be in addition to the tall trees?
It would have to, currently as we're drafted here, you got to hit the number, then you got to hit the minimum spacing. So if the minimum spacing is achieved and it's in that buffer yard, it could potentially count for it. But it sounds like, just what I'm picturing in my head, Probably not all those trees would be credited to meeting the requirement, but you can also, I mean, you can do more. There's definitely no harm in that. But there's going to be a minimum spacing and such that no tree, I'm just buried in here somewhere, is, depending on whichever yard you're in, that there's no tree within what, greater than, was it 30 feet? I
We
think?
played with 30 and 35, and we settled on one, so let's find which one we settled on.
But we allow for the grouping, but as long as there's not, there's got to at least be something, one per 35 feet, thank you. So there's not just something right dab in the middle of the yard, and then you've got, because then that doesn't meet the intent of the screening and buffering.
I found it strange, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead, Paul.
I found it strange when you look at the table 9.14.6, that you had greater trees on the front than the side and the rear. So if we're using trees for buffering, I would have thought that you would have had a greater density of trees on the side and the rear, vice the front.
And the intent for that was to be able to buffer more light and noise from the street to, it's not, think of it maybe as you're not buffering yourself from what you're bordering, but you're bordering, or you're buffering what's bordering you from your enjoying of your property. So if you look at the intent language here, Paul, we did discuss this last meeting quite a bit. I think, I don't know if it was Philip, it may have been you, I'm not trying to pick on you, or Jeremy, I think both kind of shared that concern that if you say this, then why is it not maybe at least the same with every yard? And I mean, do you have concerns, again, greater noise, there's lights that you potentially wouldn't have on the side or rear as you would with the street facing, and then you also have the ability to, for temperature control, a little bit more of a shading over the street and the paved areas. But, again, certainly you're not alone in feeling that. And there might be a way that we can try to address the intent language a little bit more, that, we're focusing, there's a greater focus on the street front for greater buffering of yada, yada.
Transportation.
Isn't the objective to preserve the streetscape, not necessarily to provide privacy from your neighbors? As I recall, that was part of the conversation.
It was part of the conversation.
That's probably that is definitely a desire, Jack. But what we feel within our grant of power from the legislation is we have to keep a strong emphasis on buffering and screening. Maybe just having a landscape standard to provide for a beautiful streetscape, even though that is definitely what Pinehurst is about, no doubt about it. It would be tough to tie something like that to our grant of power from the enabling legislation.
No, but I believe that's the reason that there's more emphasis on the front than the side and the back. I think that was one of the
The
reasons.
tree-lined streets, yes, absolutely.
Okay, I mean, thank you, it does make sense. But, this kind of, I go back to like how the comprehensive plan, is way out ahead of the POD. So has anyone went to Duke Power and say, okay, I want trees along my, there's a utilities right away. Okay, so has anyone went to Duke Power and say, I want my utility lines underground so I can landscape the trees? Because when you go over to, other places where they just top the trees and they start leaning, it looks worse than no tree. So, if our desire is to have tree-lined streets, which I do think is pretty attractive, and, I hate to be odd for someone to say that's not nice and that's not a desire or aesthetics that we want, make sure utilities go underground. Is there going to be a sidewalk? So where? Where does the tree go? Because there probably is a city right-of-way that you could plant trees there. In that area, if you know what I mean? So I don't want to be short-sighted that we just create another problem that Duke comes in here, the next big ice storm we have, and just lobs all these trees that people, many of them private citizens, just purchased.
And don't think that's not a concern that we haven't really tried to talk through at staff, and it's a very valid concern. Currently, as it's written, these requirements would be to be placed on the private property. So most cases, the utilities are there in the right-of-way, and so are the sidewalks. Again, in most cases, unless there's site constraints with new subdivisions that would cause a sidewalk to have to meander back onto the private property lot where an easement would have to be granted. Even requiring them underground, I don't know that we would still always be at the mercy of the utility and their easement, because they wouldn't necessarily be fond of planning something even within their easement, even if it were underground. I mean, we had that issue, Moore County Public Utilities, the sole water and sewer provider here in the village, they have that issue themselves all over the county with plantings and landscaping within their utility easement, and they don't allow for the erection of any type of fencing or significant landscaping within their easement now either. But that's where we've tried to build in an opportunity for staff to maybe allow for smaller trees, like the smaller dogwoods that aren't going to, after maturation of several years, they're not going to hopefully have that impact that when the utility does need to come and maintain it.
And that is the one thing that is helpful with the appendix, that it's already with the code, because it does differentiate those two types of trees. And I think we have enough flexibility built in for staff so that they can make some decisions if they need to shift placement or if we need to address, using something smaller and not necessarily a longleaf pine in the case of some of these situations.
I guess the last thing I'll say when I reviewed this is comment page 2, subparagraph 4. The village planner may authorize flexibility. I would hate to be that village planner who goes out there and says, you can put a tree here and it has to be that big, and the neighbor down here. I mean, that leads into subjectivity. And I think, I think we could have problems in enforcing a standard that is flexible.
Yeah,
So, is that Alex out there telling people where they could put trees or not?
Some days not. Depends on how much subjectivity is requested at the time.
yeah, I agree with Paul. I mean, this ability of the village planner to be flexible is a great idea, but it's going to really give you guys a challenge, I think, to execute in this sphere. I mean,
And it has in other regulatory instances where, that there's some sort of built-in allowance that the village planner can exercise rights. And we are, as staff, administrative staff, we are extremely limited in what type of flexibility, or we're not allowed to really handle anything subjectively.
this is going to be a challenge. I can
It's
tell
going
you.
to be, and if there is no way to exercise some version, then we might as well ball this up and throw it in the trash, because there's going to be so many instances in where everything's not going to fit nice and neatly in a box. I think we have, that's probably one of the things we have spent more time on than anything. If not, it's definitely in the top 3 of how in the world can we, in what instance can and should we, and in what criteria do we need to use such that we are being fair to property owner A and property owner B at the same time. So if there's any information or wisdom that the board can have and thinking through and any experiences of how we can articulate a better site condition or criteria that we could use in granting some sort of flexibility, please throw it at us, because I've been probably the one that's played devil's advocate more than Darren or Kathy whenever we've been drafting this. Well, what about this and what about that?
It's good.
I mean, I don't think we should stop. I think we should have a tree ordinance, but boy, this is going to be a challenge, the way it's,
The real
the
decision.
execution will be very, very interesting.
The real decision point here, when I think about it from a practical standpoint, is if you're John Q. Citizen and you come in and you need some flexibility, maybe you've got a site distance triangle issue or whatever, you need a little bit of flexibility. We don't want to have to send everybody that comes in the door to the Board of Adjustment and say it's going to take you, 2 months to square away this small problem that you have. And so if that's something that staff can do, it's still a better return on investment for staff time to be able to make a quick decision. Oh, yeah, okay, you can take this tree and move it over 1 foot, or you can drop this tree down to a smaller tree, than to send everything back through the Board of Adjustment. But if somebody came in and made the argument, I just can't get these trees in, period, that's a Board of Adjustment issue. It's got to come back to the board because that isn't a decision that the staff can make.
I was concerned that we may be driving a lot of business to the Board of Adjustment.
That's the very reason for this paragraph too. I mean, because then the ordinance is no good, right?
Yeah, clearly, there's an issue if you,
Yes.
if you end up a volume of variance requests that were only due to the way that this is written, then we gotta think it through.
If you have the criteria outlined and you have neighbor A and neighbor B, if you can reference the criteria and say, well, we made this judgment based on this criteria and that doesn't fit on your property, you can justify it that way. I don't know, they can probably get creative themselves and come up with.
Can't hear you.
Oh, your
Sonia,
mic,
your mic.
Cindy, sorry.
It keeps flipping back and
It's
forth.
going off, yeah.
Sorry.
Is there a, use the term industry standard, that you can maybe remove, flexibility and say, this would be, and it's known, like some type of standard? I mean, other than, size of tree and the distance between them, and they need to be, how many in the front, side, and rear? Would there be anything that would be, that would provide that village planner more objectivity when making that decision? Because I just can, from one person to the next, people are going to think it's unfair, I would assume, I guess.
And we hear that a lot in our office.
But well, I think the intent is still to meet the standard, but there's going to be those cases out there where we don't, that it's going to be unless we define what a minor variance is or a minor adjustment is, minor lot line adjustment, maybe we change the wording of flexibility. Now that I look at it, I don't think I like that word in there. I think we know, there's got to be instances where if we put a number on it and then they violate that number, then they're coming to you for Board of Adjustment. So I guess we haven't thought through, we haven't been presented with anything yet to know, we don't have any experience. We're creating something new here, so we don't have a baseline to go off of at this point, other than, I think we were just trying to build something in so that we weren't unreasonably running things to the Board of Adjustment. But maybe there's some different wording we can come up with. Maybe
Well, I wouldn't totally shy away from it. I mean, you may have to work with it for a while to see whether it's an issue or not. And if it's obvious it becomes an issue, well, then hopefully can make a quick adjustment. But I wouldn't shy away from it. I think we're on the right track.
If we come away from this meeting of that being the one item that we really need to hammer out, I will be ecstatic. I mean, because it's not going to ever get right. I can tell you that part. But just in looking at it too, I don't know if it's some sort of language like the village planner may authorize alternative.
that's what I should put.
Sure, Darren.
I did, right there.
Planting, spacing, et cetera, if one of the following site conditions exist, and then we have to go a little bit further and say what type of, are we saying that, up to 25%, just throwing stuff out
the
here.
number,
But then we do have objectivity, it allows for, there's an allowance there if you've got utility galore there on the front, or the house is non-conforming to your setback, so your house is really front-sitting. These are the things we are going to come up with.
Well, I think that's an alternative, is to have a percentage variance, so to speak, similar to what you have in the dimensional requirements, 10% or 24 inches.
Less than 2 feet, yep.
And then it specifies when, in fact, this may apply. And so you may wish to do something similar to that.
Kathy writing right now.
Because I don't know how often you've exercised that.
The administrative modification for
Yeah,
the
right.
setbacks you were mentioning,
Yeah, I mean, it's only a 10% and/or up to 24 inches or something.
whichever's
like that.
less, exactly.
Right.
And there's got to be, you've got to find one of the following that has.
Yeah,
has
some of the
been there.
reasons was misplaced foundations,
Yes, or a field error based on a good faith effort that you got a development approval for.
Right.
You know, items like that for tree preservation, that's the other one, you have to preserve a mature tree. I can probably say I've done a half a dozen in 5 years here.
That's-
It's not much, and it's reasonable, and that is actually directly granted from the general statutes too, to allow for administrative modifications.
Well, I think that's a good template for what you may be able to put in here, you know, some type of variance up to a certain percent. I don't know exactly how that would apply, but that would give you the flexibility without exercising judgment day by day by day, you know,
Tanya?
and coming to the BOA for every single issue.
And there's probably going to be a case where it might really warrant moving to the Board of Adjustment. Who knows at what point? So just because we do have potentially, you know, if we move forward, that there's a variance before the Board of Adjustment, then we'll see it then and see if it warrants that in front of the panel. But
I think Paul's
Sonia-
identified the key issue there.
Sonia, did you want to add
Yeah.
something?
Thank you. I'm going back to the staff investment time and to the Board of Adjustment. I see if you are going to allow the staff to do a lot of adjustments and putting in 25%, yada, 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 you're open Pandora's box. Because you're going to have builders that are going to take advantage of this little loophole. So if we are doing a tree conservation, et cetera, then we need to make sure this is not going to be a loophole with this 25% that Mr. Farrell, I think, proposed. I think it needs to be tighter, and then if the staff needs to make some adjustment, it can be discussed. But I think having the Board of Adjustment as a backup so that the builder would have to jump through some hoops if they're not willing to do their planting, et cetera, which I have seen in the past, then I think we should have them go to the Board of Adjustment. I mean, that's what the Board of Adjustment is for. Thank you.
and that's a good point. So there's the two sides to it. You know, staff needs to be accountable. We're doing our job. We're not just a pushover for anybody who requests. So that's where we can build in here. You've got to check 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these boxes that you can prove to us that there's utilities that are impacting the ability to do that. We really need to look at if you're preserving something there and there's not room enough because you got a really skinny front lot line and you need to, you know, there's.
We're back to the purpose.
Yep.
What's the purpose of the ordinance is to provide the buffer.
Right.
And I think the other thing you have to look at too, it's may authorize. It's not shall authorize, it's may. So if somebody comes up to us and we think that they don't touch any of these boxes, they're going to the Board of Appeals, Board of Adjustment. So it's a may, it's not a shall. So I think that's an important consideration as well. Does it put some burden on staff? Yeah, but we do that every day.
One thing we could do, we could put in a section that is basically an administrative modification and add a section that is a major modification and identify certain things that are definitely major and absolutely go straight to the Board of Adjustment. And so that will, we may still have some question marks, but it'll make it a lot more plain. If you're going down this path, you don't even start with staff. You just go straight on to the Board of Adjustment.
You know, Kathy's been working on her 160D stuff. That's right from there. And if this could help alleviate maybe the concern that Sonia just rose, I mean, Jack's referenced the administrative modification where staff can issue, and it does say is permissive only. The village planner does not always can just grant them carte blanche, and we have to also notify the village manager in writing whenever we do so. And then if we, as staff, do not elect to issue an administrative modification, then it still gives the opportunity for applicant or property owner to pursue a variance from the Board of Adjustment. So that Board of Adjustment option will always be there.
I guess when someone brings in, you know, the building site plan, on there is identified what trees go, what trees stay, you know, and what replacement trees need to be put in there. You know, that should be so easy, it shouldn't be a science project. You should be able to look at it. You've either met the standard, you know, as per the ordinance or not. You know, and if it's any harder than that, then, you know, these guys are going to get, you know, spend a lot of time counting trees, I would imagine. So, you know, it has to be simple, understood, you know, and easy to say you met the minimum requirement.
And I think the way
Yeah.
drafted it, I think we get there. It's a
You
simple.
can count,
It's a
you can
simple
count trees,
calculation.
yeah.
I just think it's a good idea to have standards exactly written down, the way we're gonna do it, because if you put that burden on the staff of making a lot of these decisions, there are people in the village who already feel that things are done in favor of some and the other. So if we have it written, which is the whole idea of this, then we shouldn't have that problem.
Philip or Julia, do you have any comments you want to make? No?
I would just say that I think what Alex said earlier is correct. You're not going to be able to define every single situation that comes up, every single property line, every single unique feature on a property. So I don't think it's possible to write this in a perfect way that it's going to address every single issue. So there has to be some sort of allowance for the staff to make those determinations at their discretion.
That'll become in public enemy number one. That's,
Better you than me.
And this is just talking about placement. They're not getting away with fewer trees or
Right.
breaking the ordinance any other way. It's just where the trees are going to be placed.
that's the current language, yes. In some instances, just for example, and the reason why we placed that there is, you see in the diagrams, a little clearer depiction of what we're talking about when we're talking about the front buffer yard, side buffer yard, rear buffer yard. Well, if the house is set back far enough, maybe we would allow for a tree required plantings to be placed just outside of that buffer yard, but it's still kind of what you would visualize as the front yard anyway, so it would still be meeting, as Darren said, that intent. That's just one example. That's an easy example, but they're going to be worse.
There's a couple of technical questions in reading through this. We did agree that the number of trees per linear feet, we wouldn't be rounding up or anything like that. It would be just, if you have 18 feet, you don't need X number of trees and so forth. So we weren't rounding up, right? It was just
That was my recollection.
Yeah,
the whole number.
I remember if I put that in, though.
One tree per whole number, whether it be 15 feet, 35 feet, or 25 feet, as I remember. Second question is, in reading this, it looks like the front there can be multiple fronts on any particular parcel, anything that has a street frontage, right? Is that right?
Correct, corner lots?
Okay, so you don't get to choose your front.
No, because we're applying the same standard to, anytime it's a front, if it's considered a front, then you get that 1 to 15? Is that the?
1 to 15. Mhm.
The only thing that happens there, and this happened in the HPC a couple times, is that people were selective as to where they wanted the front to be because it modified the setbacks, obviously, and how far they could put their fence, et cetera, et cetera. So front is very well defined here. It's any street side, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's just for applying our buffer yards and setbacks, et cetera. Staff would have to determine which one is going to be the applicable front setback here. Then there'll be a side street setback. So as far as the landscaping requirement, if you got a corner lot, you're going to have 2 quote-unquote front buffer yards. But there's still only going to be 1 front yard and 1 front setback, and then 1 will be a side street setback,
Okay,
as
so.
far as building placement.
So it is possible for a parcel owner to determine which of a quarter lot, it is possible to determine which will be the front and change the setback requirements for that particular plot. Is that correct?
For building,
But not for the trees.
Not for trees, no.
Okay, for building, yes, but not for the trees.
correct.
Okay, because we ran into that a couple times.
And we've
That one.
given us something else to think about, Jack, too. So good feedback.
Oh, no. Do you mind? I just did a couple. There was a term used on one of the, was it, oh, here it is, it was a heritage tree or something to that effect. There's protected, and then there's specimen, but the word heritage was used in here. I didn't see it defined anywhere.
We have it defined, I believe, elsewhere in the code. I didn't bring my code book in with me. Do you have it, Alex?
That's an actual.
We're talking about heritage or champion?
Heritage trees.
Oh,
Mhm.
champion.
A 100-year tree or something.
Champion tree? Was
Oh,
it
it's on,
Champion,
yeah,
yes.
first
And,
page of section 3 there in the second paragraph.
It came up with historic preservation as well. But in researching that, remember, this is when we went and looked and said, how many do we have?
There were only 2
They
or
were all-
3
yeah,
in
right,
Old
mhm.
County.
This is a term that I could find a definition for outside of the, or internal to
I
the
wonder if we
PDO.
need to reflect just champion trees only. Let's see.
Like flagpole, there's no definition for flagpole.
I saw that, yeah.
And we get some interesting subdivision lot shapes sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And there's only one credit per parcel relative to driveways,
You get one 20-foot driveway credit.
120.
even though your driveway may go in and out on different roads or on a corner lot, for example.
I thought that's, I mean,
I think that's what we agreed to. I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, I thought that's what you wanted. Mhm.
I think it's tough to write this, believe me. The only thing that, in looking at section 9 of our present PDO, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to look when this is incorporated into. Is it possible to actually kind of redo all of section 9 and incorporate this draft into it? Because the numberings kind of overlap, 9.5.
We pulled it out
1.1,
just
so
to keep
forth.
from having to give you so many pages, but basically what's already in that, and what 9.5.1 is going to become part 2, and then this will slide in as part 1 in front of it. So, because part 2 really will focus more on what are the commercial standards for landscaping requirements, and we're not changing those in any way, other than the clearing and grading aspect of it. So, but when we bring it back to you in ordinance format for adoption, going down that path, we'll put it in so you can see how it all fits together.
Yeah, because it's unclear, it's difficult to figure out how this is going to fit into the current section 9.
so basically, this is going to be the first thing you see when you turn to section 9.5 of the PDO.
Okay.
And then once you finish with this document here, this section, then it's going to pick up with almost what's there. But 9.5.1, the purpose and scope is obviously going to be this part.
Right.
And then it'll just start off with planted buffers and then all that on.
Okay, so these sections, or at least this one section will replace 951 and 9511, is that correct?
Correct. And then everything else will pick up at
And everything else will be-
9.5.2.
Just renumbered, okay.
Yep.
Great, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. That's it.
Does anyone else? Paul, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Bill? Sonia?
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions or comments?
Nope.
I didn't hear you.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
How about Philip? Julia?
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge what I think we've been hearing through the meeting is that this is a incredibly nuanced and difficult task that our staff has taken on. And I just wanted to commend them for doing the yeoman's work here and going back again and again and sourcing ideas from us. I know we're not there yet, but I just really want to acknowledge the effort that's gone into this project.
Yeah, we all
Thank you.
agree with that. Well said, Julia. I have one comment on page 7 of the larger one. When we had talked about using the 12-inch as the beginning circumference or dBH. So in 3C, I think I would like to see the first tree credit will be granted for trees that are 12 inches up to 16 inches. Because if you read D, once they're at 16 inches, they qualify for 2 trees. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I think, because when it
Up
says
to.
12 inches to 16 inches, it sounds like if you have a 16-inch tree, you could argue, okay, according to C, we get 1 credit, and according to D, we would get 2 credits. Yeah. So if it's 15 inches, they get 1 tree. Okay, good. I think, Sonia, the paper that you sent to us to look at, I think these guys have incorporated really well in that first paragraph of 951, the last sentence, which I thought that was good.
I just found it to be interesting to have gotten that while we're working on this. So that's why I wanted to share it.
Well, we're almost there, right?
Oh, yeah, this is
Great.
This is great.
And I think staff we're proud that we really started from scratch on this one. We didn't really have a lot of models to work off of. And that's probably why it's been a little bit clunky with some of the language, because normally in planning, we'll steal from somebody else. This one, we couldn't really steal from anybody else, so we really started from scratch, so.
And the
we
nice
appreciate
thing,
all the feedback.
nice thing is other people are going to be stealing from you.
Hopefully.
Because you've got
Chickens
it.
yet.
Yeah, right.
I have another question on page 5 of the 9.51. Under the tree survey, the second paragraph, if a clearing and grading should it be permit or
Application.
or
one the other.
application in there? Okay. And then on the tables, on the side yard, you have the double asterisks on that, as well as on the number of required trees. So when I first read that, it's like side yard, if a lot is a flag lot or an irregularly shaped lot, the linear feet of street frontage is based on the widest street facing dimension of the front yard. Does that need to be asterisk? Does the side yard need to go to that? No?
No, I don't, it shouldn't. That's good.
It didn't make sense to me, but I thought, I might not be reading it right.
I have it anywhere else. I do. Okay, good.
I agree with Julia. You guys did a great job on this. So are we finished, or do you need
If-
anything else?
No, there'll be no action from the board at this point. This was just to get a little bit more, better information and direction from you guys. I think the biggest thing we've got to look at now is the staff flexibility, or modifications that we can allow to these standards, and why and how someone can justify it. And there's a couple little cleanup items we need to do, and I mean, I'm these guys may shoot me, but I'm ready to go to a public hearing.
You're ready to go in January.
Yeah, because I really am. I mean, we don't want to go, obviously, we've done this and peppered you guys with get some feedback, so we don't go to a public hearing cold. And I don't feel like we're going to at this point. I think there's very little now that we need to really update the board on, so keep your calendars free if it might be a little too aggressive to look at a public hearing in February. If there's an opportunity for a special meeting to get this to you guys, and so we can start getting feedback from the public, because that's going to be the very next step, the first time it's really open for them, and, you know, we hope we've got some support, and we also hope if we're going to get some feedback, it's going to be something that we can really work toward.
It'll really be interesting in public feedback to see the reaction of contractors.
And
First, because, I mean, they have to, you know, they're on the hook on some of this stuff.
exactly. And Jeremy rose that point a couple of meetings ago. I think it was the one right before your first meeting, Jack. It may have been your first meeting with us. And I would like to follow back up with him, because I think he was going to try to provide me with a sampling of folks to kind of maybe start sharing this once we got closer or satisfied with materially the content of what we're going to look at proposing here. So we could maybe start getting some feedback from them, maybe potentially before it's completely rolled out. Because it would, I mean, they're the ones that are going to have to work around it, so it would be great to hear. And we've, you know, there's of course folks that deal with our office every week, at least every month, that we could definitely reach out to, and
think
sooner
contract-
rather than later, it's going to happen.
I think contractors' feedback is important as long as they're a resident in Pinehurst. If they're not,
Thank
you know, contractors desire one thing, maximum profit. They're not building a house for themselves. So, I mean, yeah, it would be interesting. I don't think they have a vote.
Oh, absolutely not.
Unless they're a resident, you know.
And we've got a few folks that we can definitely reach out to.
I mean, there's
that come to
plenty of
mind.
examples where contractors maximized, you know, rate of return regardless of what, you know, the outcome has been.
And a lot of what you said is the reason why staff has worked to provide you what we've had based on the feedback we continuously heard in these forums and these public hearings, and what we heard during the comp plan amendment process, or the adoption process. This is why we're doing what we're doing, is because of what we've been hearing, because of that very reason.
I mean, we, in our evaluation of it, we just don't think it's an onerous restriction or onerous regulation in that, yeah, there's gonna be potentially some additional cost. You can save this cost if you plan the subdivision right. If you don't, you're adding a handful of trees to the lot. It will be an expense, but it's not I don't think it's extraordinary. We're going from 4 trees to what do we think, maybe, well, it's gonna be different
Gonna
based on
depend.
lot sizes.
On average, it was about 7. From the examples of site plans that we've received the past 8 months, from all the samplings I kept grabbing, it was 4 to 8 in the front, and, well, it was really just 4 across the lot. So, you know, you look at a total of 8, 2, 3, 4. So,
100-foot
you know,
wide
a little over
lot, yeah.
double the amount of trees, but if you preserve them, you know, on site, then you've met the requirement if you preserve what's there.
And they're already doing it. I mean, if you don't have the trees for the ordinance, you're putting it up. So it doesn't make development that much more difficult in the community.
And the intent for that was because I know Ms. Kalinsky was one of the very ones that we were hearing from on a routine basis of this outcry of this clear cutting, where they completely, so that's why we took this approach, is it gets them thinking about it before they come right in and, you know, prepare to do that. One thing Darren did just ask me a second ago, and I just started thinking through, just want to make sure we can just get a head nod from the group. For those existing developed lots, is the 50% threshold kind of where you guys want to go? I think there was
On
one
redevelopment.
jurisdiction, I think, looked at something a little greater. Was it? It's like a 75%, I think, was that Nightdale? Or someone else?
50% increase is a substantial increase.
And in most cases, most lots may not be able to handle that based on impervious coverage or
Right,
building
right.
setback, so it may not even happen. But if we could get a consensus on that number, that'd be great before we leave.
How did you come up with that number?
It's a standard.
Yep, we basically looked and said, this looks pretty typical
Okay.
for what people do.
That's a planned development, but no house there yet, right?
That would be if you're living in your house and a lot in Pinehurst, and you want to add on and make an addition, and you're talking about greater than 50% of the existing footprint, then you've got to come into compliance with these regulations.
Okay,
If you're doing something that's
understand, yeah.
30%, you don't.
If I could, I'd like to ask a question. We've tried to include some diagrams and a couple of examples, and I was just curious if you thought there was anything else in here that we could provide as an example that would help make it more clear to developers and the public what our objectives are. If there's anything else that would help depict that. If anybody does, just let us know, because I've found that it's really helpful if you get one of those sticky questions, if you can go ahead and answer it in the code. It keeps everybody from agonizing over it later.
Not an example, but what you may do in a public hearing is have pictures of streetscapes with varying a number of trees in the front and size and so forth to show you what it would look with and without the ordinance or something to that effect.
Good idea, Jack. I like that.
I mean, because you can read this all day, it's kind of static, but if you have that visual, what you're trying to achieve, this versus that, it could definitely help. Good suggestion.
I mean, if you're selling, that's the way to sell.
We might have to do quite a bit of selling.
I wonder if, the areas where you would want, to maybe modify where the trees are planted, if you show a house that has overhead wires and driveway and something where, it's not possible to plant the trees, that, I don't know if that's possible or not, but that would give them a visual. Anything else?
You can fine tune this forever. I mean, you can divide by 2 forever and you'll never get to 0. So, I think you've come about as close as you can possibly come, with the exception of adding the flexibility issue, I think.
Fine. All right, ready to move on to other business? Darren, Alex, you ready? There's just a few things I'd like to cover tonight. First of all, last month I gave you an outline for public hearings, and I asked if anyone had any comments or changes or suggestions. And does anyone have any tonight? If not, I would like you to just email them to me before our first public hearing, or if we go through the public hearing and you find issues, just let me know. I don't know.
Did you email that? If you did, I missed it. Wasn't here last week, or last month, excuse me.
It was here last month. I'll email it to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Actually, I can give you a copy.
Okay, I'll grab it here at the end.
And then the second, I did email you this week. Does anybody have any comments about that on there? I didn't think so, but.
At the retreat?
I did.
Good.
We were masked for 8 hours there. So Village Council had they still want to meet with Planning and Zoning, but they haven't set a date. And so they probably won't until one of their meetings in January. But having gone to the strategic planning sessions, there were 3 8-hour days, which Alex got out of, but Darren got to sit through. And so I thought some of these things would be helpful for you to kind of get an idea of what the council's looking at and what's maybe coming up before the board. So I sent the summary out, and hopefully we'll find out the day that we're going to meet with council. Just to summarize it, I mean, has everyone had a chance to read it? Or?
That was a great summary.
No. Okay. Well, I started it off with acronyms because that was the hardest part for me the first day is, what the heck do all these acronyms mean? So if you read through any of the documents, you have a cheat sheet. And then December 2nd was a pre-retreat meeting, and basically they went over surveys and trends and just gathered a bunch of information because the village and council exercised fact-based decision-making. And so these were all the facts that they were looking at and to help them make their decisions on the next 2 planning days. And it was pretty interesting. I kind of summarized one that especially is pertinent to us is that assuming 150 new building permits a year, Pinehurst will be built out in 8 years. And this year there were 188 permits.
Yeah, we've been running close to 200, I think, the past couple of years now. I think last 5 years, so that's a very conservative figure,
So it may be
So
sooner than that.
probably. Well, we're getting into some of the lots that are becoming more difficult to develop, but, good.
Does that include the ETJ?
No.
Okay.
But that's going to spark some more interest, I think, in the ETJ if we run out of space.
And most of the ETJ at this point is all zoned R210, right? I mean, there's some pockets that aren't, but most of that's R210.
Also, VA loans are the strongest provider of mortgage funds in Moore County, which kind of shows the military influence of the growth around here. And then some requests that they've received from key partners. So the USGA and the resort, preparations for the US Open in 2024. Then First Health has requested a daycare facility near the hospital campus for the medical workers. So I'm sure that'll be part of the Village Place plan. And improved parking for First Health employees and for the Pinehurst Resort. Parking came up as an issue for several. And then, of course, traffic and pedestrian crossings. So those are just some of the key points I pulled out. So on the first day, December 10th, they did a review and affirm of the mission, vision, and core competencies. And the vision and mission remained the same. They changed one competency from utilize volunteers, was changed to engaging volunteers. So it's nicer. And then I listed 10 of the strategic opportunities, and those remain the same. And they had 47 OFIs, which is opportunities for improvement.
OFIs, yep.
And all of those were associated with one of the 10 strategic opportunities. And the ones that applied to us, like the biggest issue was the rewrite update of the PDO. We need a stronger PDO in order to maintain what we have now and to direct future growth in Pinehurst. And there was strong support for hiring a consultant to rewrite the PDO, which would help, but it's still going to require a lot of time for the staff, planning department, and for P&Z to review everything and update it. They're also looking to have a UDO, a Unified Development Ordinance, to replace the PDO and the engineering standards. So that would be a different document, but would that have much effect on us, or I don't know.
Mostly formatting, isn't it?
And I mean, there's obviously some items in our engineering standards that staff has very much identified could be revisited, but that'll probably be done probably outside of this group before it gets part of a UDO, but it may not. I mean, because you're going to talk about engineering standards.
Well, we have to refer to that when we're looking at a project. I mean, will we have to consider the engineering ordinances as well if we're all working out of the UDO? That's what were my concerns.
Most of that will fall under the technical review staff, and you'll have the recommendation from them. Most, just like we kind of do now when we have a rezoning proposed or a site plan proposed or a subdivision like we've had, the village engineer has been heavily involved in all those reviews before it gets to you guys. And if there's a waiver requested, let's say, then we'll make sure that he provides his input on that, and if need be, to be present at the hearing to address any questions or concerns they may have. So it will be picked up as part of the staff analysis.
It seems strange that all that needs done and we're in the last phase of build-out of Pinehurst. You know what I mean?
But then there'll be renovations, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, and there's still, I'll put it out there, there are still growth opportunities in the region. So there's still growth opportunities in Pinehurst should that be the direction that people want to go. You do have, And
Also-
you have a number of, you also, and we're hopefully handling it with the small area plans for at least 2 of those areas. You're going to have you have a lot of development and redevelopment opportunities in some of these commercial areas. So you look at Pinehurst South, for instance, there's a lot of vacant land down there still to be developed. That's going to be handled with the small area plan. The Village Place area, that broader area, again, is going to be handled with the Village Place, but you got area 211, so you got that area by Pinewald on 211. You've got the medical district, which is going through some periods of regrowth in that area. And then we have the potential to expand that ETJ out north of 211 and maybe up 15501 towards 73. So we're actually currently doing an analysis of that right now. So there might be, you know, that UDO is not only just going to cover the village proper, but the ETJ as well. So that's why we think it's important to get it right, or get it done.
I'd also like to add, quote, updates to the PDO to be a quarterly agenda item for P and Z. And Darren gets to figure out how we do that, considering how long it's taken the tree proposal.
Well, there's low-hanging fruit that we can.
Yes, there's some items that, again, we have a running list, it's just we haven't, unfortunately, had much opportunity, and the tree preservation has become a hot priority, and at least that is just, that's that's maintenance stuff, some of it too, where this is just starting anew.
For example, we need to get the 160D stuff adopted, and Kathy's currently working on that, and that's all relatively routine, low-level PDO items. But the next major one that's going to potentially come before you all will be and Jack started on this when he was on council, is the highway corridors. We're currently, you know, we're working on a draft. We're not to the point where we can share anything yet because we haven't really drafted a lot of the components of it yet, but we're working on the highway corridors draft. So some type of highway corridor overlay ordinance will be the next thing that we present to you.
So,
Can I ask a question there, Cindy?
sure, go ahead, Julia.
I'm beginning to have an understanding of what they meant based on the discussion y'all just had, but I was a little confused by what they mean by updates to the PDO as a quarterly agenda item. Is council suggesting that quarterly P&Z would be asked to review staff's work on a amended PDO item?
I think the intent, what they're picking that up from, what the county does is, county just adopted a new zoning ordinance not too long ago, right? Kathy?
And did a major revision to it since then.
So they did a major revision, and when you do a major revision to your ordinance, there's always things that you miss. So what happens is, and I just did this in Oshkosh, we comprehensively redid our 1997 zoning ordinance. And after we adopted it, we realized that there's various little holes that we've missed something. So what you do is you bring, what we got on the schedule is bringing back to the P&Z up there quarterly updates to clean up some of the problems that we realized were in place. So I think that's where they want to go. There's some low-hanging fruit that we can do. We just haven't, as a group, sat down and talked about, all right, how do we start handling it? Because part of it's been a personnel issue. We just haven't had, it's been a staff capacity. We just haven't had the capacity to get that as part of our operating system. But I think there's some things that we're working, there's some things that are in the queue. 160D will be the next set that we can get done. There might be some other ones. Maybe we need to create a small subcommittee to talk about some of these things so we can start moving them forward. I really haven't sat down and figure out a systematic process to do this yet.
I think you're right, Darren. As I recall, the intention may be that on a quarterly basis, a working session of the Planning and Zoning Board be put together such that you can develop the list of potential changes to the PDO and prioritize them and decide what you're going to execute over the next 6 months or something to that effect. It isn't every quarter you're going to make changes to the PDO necessarily, but at least you have a working group that analyzes on a quarterly basis what needs to be done in the future. That's the way I remember that conversation.
Yeah, we certainly have had discussions amongst ourselves about areas of the PDO that we, as planning and zoning, would, the planning and zoning board, would like to recommend that amendments or updates to the PDO be undertaken. So, I mean, a bit of a two-way street, perhaps.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. I hadn't heard that, or didn't get that from the meeting, but that makes sense.
Outside conversations.
You have friends in high places. The other one is to utilize community viz model to evaluate the impact of development, and that just kind of went hot and cold with some of the council members. But, I don't know, Darren, do you want to say
We-
anything?
We haven't used it yet because there's Kathy's used Community Viz a little bit. There's a cost to it.
The cost to it, there's a learning curve to it, and that's probably the biggest thing. And the other thing that happens is if you don't use it often enough, you forget how to use it, so.
It's an analysis tool.
Mhm.
It's simply that, simply put, it's an analysis tool. I think the intent was to use Community Viz to evaluate the impacts of development as you move forward. Now, it's a tool that you have the inputs, you control the inputs going in, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So say you wanted to look at the effects of your small area plan proposals, and you know what you look like right now because you've got your building footprints and whatnot. And say you want to grow your density or you want to grow your commercial area, you can start to project what that would look like on a map. And you do that by putting the inputs in and giving it some parameters so it knows what it needs to work with. And that way you can begin to see how that footprint of the village could change. It is a very useful tool, but it's not one you want to use all the time for every single purpose. It's got very specific applications that are beneficial.
And they use that for the comprehensive plan,
Mhm.
right, in generating the different
Well, the focus area stuff?
focus areas. And the last one is the comprehensive conservation plan for the ETJ will likely be pushed out to 2024 with everything else. So they would like to evaluate both the positive and negative impacts of the USGA moving to Pinehurst.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Cindy, for interrupting you. Just wanted to state that with the information we saw earlier about when the anticipated build-out of Pinehurst proper would be, and the understanding that I think we all have, that as that build-out, as that margin decreases in the build-out, that there's going to be intensified push of development into the ETJ. This is a really delicate balancing act. And as the ETJ member on this board, I just want to voice my concern that we cannot push off looking at conservation for too long at the same time that we are increasing the development pressure on the ETJ.
And that's part of the reason why I wanted to bring these before you, before we meet with council, so that you can have time to think about it and voice your concerns with them. Because that's what they want from us, and you can get a better understanding. All of this is just hypothetical, what they're talking about. Nothing, no decisions were made, nothing concrete. It's just sort of the direction that they were going. So nice thing is they are hiring a transportation planner who will help with traffic, parking, and stormwater management. And that person's coming on board, is that correct? No?
They're hiring Leo?
I don't think he wants the job.
We've advertised for the position. We've got a handful of, we didn't get a lot of response to that request, so we might have a couple that we might want to talk to, but we didn't get an overwhelming response to our ad, or to the employment opportunity.
But they're still planning on bringing someone on board to help
We're
with
still-
those things?
Yeah, we just don't have a time frame to get anybody on board right now.
They're still talking about neighborhood sidewalks and street lighting, and there is money to create a small area plan for Village Place and North Carolina Highway 5 in 2021. So those two areas, we'll
Doing that right now,
working on it right now.
right now.
And then for the next 5 years, there is discussion about moving the public services complex because it's over there in the Rattlesnake Village Place area, building a new police station or substation, preparing for a future third fire station, looking at moving the Welcome Center, the possibility of a village-funded library, and they will also evaluate the capacity of Village Hall to meet the increased service needs. Anything else I missed?
That was a good summary.
And the second day, I'm not done yet, sorry.
That's just day one?
That was just day one. So then, the second day was talking about money, 5-year financial forecast and the fund balance policy, potential workforce needs. So some of the, one interesting fact that I heard is in the past, the tax rate for Pinehurst has been as high as 35 cents per $100. And 20 years ago, when Natalie came to the village, the rate was 31 cents per $100, and it is currently 30 cents per $100. So they're talking about, increasing the taxes, but really,
They got money in the bank now, why would they increase taxes?
Because they want to get it
There's money in the
ahead.
bank now, why increase taxes?
because the money in the bank is for future projects, so they don't have to borrow money. And if we bring, well, let me continue.
Okay.
When we approved the new elementary school and the cancer center buildings to exceed our 35-foot tall ordinance, it created a need for a new ladder truck. And the new truck, which I think was about $1 million, I said, will require 9 new firefighters, 3 for each shift, to operate the truck. So that increased staff. And if we add a village-funded library, there will be new staff maintenance and cleaning requirements there. And there was talk about additional parks and recreation and beautification projects, which would require more staff to maintain these areas. And with additional staff, finance and HR will need additional help to support payroll and HR needs. So it's kind of like, we're growing. And it is important to realize that the decisions we make here affect other areas of Pinehurst and government. So council will adopt a Village of Pinehurst balanced scorecard in January, and then the strategic operating plan and annual budget will come in June. Okay, now I'm done. Would you like to add anything? Does anyone have any questions or comments or?
Unfortunately, the planning and zoning doesn't have to execute all that.
But it's going to cause projects to come.
We will be seeing the results of that in some form over the next few years, I'm sure.
Well, in all of the, well, some of the construction and small area plans will come before us to be reviewed, and the PDO is going to, all those changes. So.
I guess for us in our specific role here, and we've all brought it up many times, where does the comp plan, the PDO, guide what we do? Because most things that we see, are kind of out of line with where the comp plan, is trying to drive or provide that long-range guidance, for Pinehurst wants to go, stuff going down Highway 5. How do we, get ahead of that, so it's more in line, because we saw, what was a month ago or so, a development, it was supposed to be multi-use, that in the long-range comp plan, it was a multi-use but it was not a multi-use development. It's private land, they're going to propose whatever they want, but it doesn't appear as though the comp plan, provides us with, that long range, here's where we want to get to type of, I guess, planning, if that makes sense.
You want to answer that one?
Well, I think the comp plan is meant to set your course. You're supposed to, once you adopt a comp plan, then there's, of course, a variety of priorities and strategies in there. One of them is you generally, when you adopt a comp plan, you should be readopting a PDO, because the PDO that's generally in existence is not the one that the new comp plan is based on. So that's where we're going in some of those directions. Things like the tree preservation that's an ordinance that's in line with, and there are some specific hard recommendations in the comprehensive plan about specific PDO changes, and we're working on that, and we
Okay.
will continue to move in that direction. There are other things like zone changes, being proactive in doing a proactive zone change. The only one that can really do a proactive zone change is the council. Council would have to direct us to move forward with a proactive zone change. There are things like moratoriums that we can discuss. I would stay tuned on a couple of those items because I think you're going to see some additional discussion at the council level in that regard. It's getting at some of the concerns you just raised, Paul. That development down on Pinehurst Cottages, yeah, it's something that's not consistent with our comp plan goals. It's moving forward. It's going to move forward, but we're trying to protect ourselves in other areas around that at this point, so.
And I don't want to be misunderstood that I'm either pro or con, or, I don't have an opinion on it. I'm just looking at the documents, that kind of guide the future, and what's coming in is not in line with those documents. And, where do you say no? Obviously there has legal consequences if you do. So, that's kind of where I still struggle with, what our roles are when we're to form an opinion and provide recommendations.
Well,
I'm
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's where, whenever we have an item, especially for a public hearing, and where there needs to be an action by this board for a recommendation to village council, if it's for a zoning amendment or it's for a text amendment to the PDO like we're looking here, you are, as a board, collectively to adopt a statement of consistency or inconsistency with that comp plan. So that's how you use the comp plan as your tool and coming and arriving to a decision of a recommendation to village council. And we'll kind of tee you up for it within the staff material
Yeah,
and look at it.
I think that would be
But
good.
Now, the subdivision review that you were just referencing a couple months ago, now that's basically an administrative decision. It's a use by right, so it wasn't necessarily running afoul of any of the existing zoning regulations, and that's where we're back to what Darren was just talking about, where our regulatory documents got to catch up with the adopted comp plan and start implementing some of those strategies. And it's been a little over a year now, so it's time, because we
Yeah, and that's
are
where-
facing pressure.
And that's, the struggle. One's enforceable by law, must do, and one's just a good idea.
Paul, I appreciate you bringing that up about the moratoriums too. I've asked that for months and months and months, and I don't know how we can move forward with that because nobody's given us answers on that. Now, I do agree that we need to have some moratoriums, and I believe we can have some moratoriums, but it just hasn't happened.
Keep an eye out.
Yeah, I mean, we can build hundreds of homes in the ETJ at 5,000 square foot lots. There's plenty of places out there that you can. I mean, so if that's what you want, I mean, right now, that's what the laws say, so
Yeah, but
In the ETJ,
you just have to be careful, I guess.
Well, in ETJ, you couldn't, you'd have to change the zoning. And as part of your review, you're gonna look at the comp plan. Comp plan says this should be preserved for rural development. So if somebody's coming in within the ETJ and wants to do another subdivision, that action would require an amendment to the comp plan. What we would tee up is we'd say, it's not consistent with the comp plan, we don't recommend you approve this zone change and subdivision, and then go from there.
But didn't we have to approve that subdivision because it met the requirements of the PDO? And that's the law at this time, and it hasn't been updated to match the comprehensive plan, so.
And that's where moratoriums can be helpful for you to can kind of put the pause button on other applications coming in until you can catch up. But there are protections, for property owners, and realistically, there should be at least some.
And I meant recommend, not approve. but-
Right, we would be characterizing it as consistent with and not inconsistent with the PDO, but not necessarily consistent with the comp plan, and there's a difference. So then they're recommendations only, obviously.
Does that help, Paul?
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then I have one more item. This is going to be Joel's last meeting. His third term runs out on the 31st of January. And one of Joel's greatest gifts is to bring clarity to what the public really wants in our public hearings. And he's been a valuable member of this board and a great support for me. So tonight, I've asked Joel to share with us some of his insights, observations, suggestions that he has collected over his 9 years on the Planning and Zoning Board. Yes. So he's typed out.
Great.
Now, if we can't mail it to the others, so you'll have to read it, and then we'll email it.
I didn't want to read this because I've always made a practice of assuming that everybody I was in a room with was intelligent enough to.
But we
Take the-
have
take-
virtual people who don't have a copy of it.
Yeah, I know, but I always made the assumption they were all smart enough to pick up that C. Jane book run when we were kids. So I was asked to just think back to my thoughts, and this will take, I guarantee you, less than 5 minutes, over the 9 years and what it is that I have gleaned from sitting on this side of the table, because for a number of years, I sat out there and asked the staff to approve projects for me. I'm not a builder, but I did some. But I'll just start off by saying, and you can all read this, but in my opinion, being the chair of anything is someone like being the conductor of a symphony orchestra. The conductor or the chair gets all the detail work done ahead of time and then relies on the musicians to play the music. And the musicians don't get to change the music. You play what was given to you to play. I've not always found that to be true. But just running down this as my guidelines when I walk through these doors, the first thing I do is leave my personality, hopefully, and certain my opinions, my personal opinions, outside this room. I try to read the agenda items, and I always do before I come to the meeting. If possible and practical, I visit the site in question that the applicants are concerned about, and I try and determine if the application complies with the PDO. But I'll get a little more on that, and it's in number 2. We have an outstanding staff here, and always have, that will only recommend projects to the Planning and Zoning Board for review that strictly comply with the PDO state and federal regulations. So over the years, I've always been amazed at people who want to question the water runoff, or are we complying with one regulation at a state level here? And I can honestly say in all my years in doing this, I've never noticed the staff, you or the people before you, who hadn't had this covered before, because I've never seen you hand us something that didn't meet the PDO and the long-range plan. If I have compliance concerns, my way of doing this was to discuss them first with the chair and then with the staff before the meeting. I've tried never to say or do anything that might embarrass the staff, the applicant, or anyone in the audience, or another board member. I think that's with one exception over the years. I try to remember that my task is not to redesign the project, but to be fair and considerate of the people that did that when they brought it to the board. I try to listen closely, and this is a main point to me, to the concerns or approval of the folks in the audience that live in the immediate area or eyesight of the proposed project. I've always tried to put myself in their shoes and ask myself, how might this affect my quality of life as it will theirs? I only ask them questions that are germane to the project. And I frankly only would like them to make comments that are germane to the project. And that we as a Planning and Zoning Board have some control over. I'd like to be mindful of the number of folks in the audience who speak in approval or disapproval of the project and why they're here to do that. So one of my ongoing discussions with our current mayor has always been, well, John, I really couldn't do that because there were 2 people that showed up to speak against this, and they lived 1.5 miles away. So I don't think their comments were germane. And John would always tell me that if 2 people show up, for every person that shows up, there's 25 people that didn't. And I said, no, for everybody who shows up, there's 2 people who didn't. So I don't know how this number of people who don't show up, it's like proving a negative. But I'm always concerned about how many people show up, because if it's a real issue, and Lord knows we've had them, then I want to always be mindful of how this will affect people's lives. But so much of this to me as we grow is like moving 1.5 miles from the airport on their runway approach, and then suddenly deciding after the airport's been there for 50 years that there are planes that use that, and so they make noise. I'm always amazed at that. So when I hear people come in and complain about, well, gee, they're going to build a home across the street, and we had this rather recently, and it's going to block my view of the golf course. It's like, what, that lot wasn't there for the last 50 years? So again, I'm just trying to figure out how does this affect people. But above all else, and I'll get to it in the last item, if possible, I've always tried to wait until all the other board members make their points or express their concerns before I speak. I understand that the chair controls the meeting, and I understand that it's not necessary for me to be the brightest guy at the table or prove to anyone that I'm the stupidest guy. Nobody will know how stupid I am until I open my mouth. Finally, that if the project complies with all the PDO requirements and the long-range plan concepts, even if they are moving targets, which was a comment I wanted to make to you, this town has grown from, I'll get off a script for a second, from Steve Smith, who I used to play golf with before he became mayor, and I remember playing with him when he told me he was going to try and run for mayor. And I said, why in God's name would you want to do that? And he said to me, because I'm going to make sure that nobody ever does to this town what I did across America. Steve was the president, I believe, of Pulte Homes, or one of these major nationwide slab home builders. And he was hell-bent and determined that that would not happen here. And he built this. So we've gone from trying to get a permit to build an outhouse in this town was a 2 to 3 month project, quite seriously. And if you're trying to build a decent home, it went on for a long time, because he didn't think we should grow the town the way it has grown, to all the way to the end of this, where now I hear people complaining that it's too easy to get a project passed through here and get a permit. So I've watched it all, but I sincerely and try and always remember that our job here is that if the project complies with the PDO requirements and the long-range plan, the applicant should get their approval. It doesn't make any difference whether it looks good, it doesn't look good, that's not my job. It's just to interpret how that fits in, and I rely on these guys and their staff to make sure that that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Those are great guidelines. I appreciate that. And now everyone else on the board is going to have to pick up where Joel leaves off.
Well, it has been an absolute joy.
Okay.
It really has. For the most part, with very few exceptions, I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for letting me serve with you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joel. Is there anyone else, any other business? Thank you, Joel. Well, our next regular meeting is February 4th, 2021. And if there's no other business, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
I have a motion by Jack to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Paul. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Did any of you virtuals have anything you wanted to add? If I didn't. No?
Just to thank Joel for his contributions, and I feel like I've learned a lot from you, especially the way you interact with the public. You are far better at it than I am, and I'm
Most
going to
of us
miss
are.
having you on the board with us.
All right. Then we are adjourned.